Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 159, where we're going to talk about backfiring tactics and power over dynamics, which, as you'll hear, are pretty much one and the same, and are really vital to understand if you want to make your marriage that more fulfilling, more loving, more deeply connected one that I know you do want. Before we dive in, I want to ask you a favor. So one of my missions is to spread this podcast far and wide to help as many deep-feeling, big-hearted, sensitive women like you have better marriages, have happier lives. I could use your help in doing that. So if you've been enjoying the podcast and you know anyone who might be interested in this podcast, and by the way, lots of men have told me that this podcast is really helpful to them too. So this isn't just for women, even though I more directly speak to women. So if you know anyone who might benefit from this, and again, by the way, these people do not have to be highly sensitive or know that they're highly sensitive to learn and get so much from this podcast. Really, everything I'm saying here can apply to everyone. Obviously, there's some specific things that are much more targeted towards highly sensitive people, but even within that, there's a wide range of people who might not think of themselves or, pass the quote-unquote test to show that you're highly sensitive. They have some traits and attributes that might fall under being sensitive that this podcast will super help with. So in any case, my request of you is to share this podcast with one or more people. And if you share it with 2 or more people, I'm going to give you totally free access to my Highly Sensitive, Happily Married podcast map. That's that directory that will help you sort through and find the most important podcast episodes for you and your relationship to help your relationship the best. So how this will work is you'll share this podcast, whether it's a specific episode or just the whole thing, with 2 or more people. And once you've done that, you can contact me and let me know you've done it, and I'll take your word for it. So this is obviously a trust thing. So please only let me know if you've actually shared this with 2 or more people. And I'm going to put my contact info in the description for this podcast in the show notes, so that'll be easy to access. And thank you in advance for sharing this. I appreciate you so much. Okay, so let's dive in. So in my big, recent, important episode about the emerging new paradigm of marriage, that's episode 55, I talked about how to get to the full partnership in all realms that we women are wanting these days. And that to do so, we can't use what I call old school methods, which essentially add up to a sort of, quote, power over, unquote, dynamic, which in a super nutshell is sort of like this sort of unconscious sort of muscling and forcing your way into your partner being the partner you want, or trying to, because it doesn't work. And really the way most humans tend to actually do this by instinct is what I call the backfiring tactics. These backfiring tactics are most often an unconscious power over approach, or what we could also call false relational empowerment, because although some unconscious part of us is acting them out in an attempt to make things better for us and our relationship, they actually make things worse. They really don't work to create the loving, supportive, tender, fun, light, affectionate, team in life relationship that I know you want, that I know so many women want. Now, as you're listening, please be extra specially compassionate with yourself, because we humans do these backfiring tactics because they're often the only way we've been shown to make our marriage more of what we want. And they're instinctual in a way, if not skillful. They're very, very human, right? They're not just something that select few bad people fall into. It's not like that at all. Like, all of us humans are prone to this, to using these backfiring tactics and ultimately making our relationships harder for ourselves and more painful. They also, what's so interesting about these backfiring tactics is I firmly believe that they come from a virtuous, caring place inside of us. They come from wanting things to be good for you, good in your relationship. So really, when you fall into them, when you sort of fall prey to these backfiring tactics, your intention unconsciously is virtuous, but the method is unvirtuous. Is that a word? Although sometimes they happen simply from a lack of knowing another way, the backfiring tactics, in a sense, are most often an unconscious attempt to control your own feelings, right? To make yourself feel good. Like, that's at the bottom of them. And almost always, unfortunately, by using this sort of false power to try to change, alter, or fix the other person, your partner in this case, in some way. Or just to see yourself as better than your partner so you can feel good. So we'll get into that, seeing yourself as better than, as part of this. Now, most of us don't notice this or know that this is what's at the bottom of it. But I want you to notice how taking care of your feelings this way, or trying to caretake your feelings, I get a little tongue-tied there, in this way, like, of course you want to take care of your feelings. And it's a beautiful thing to do that, to take care of your feelings. It's just that some ways of doing that work, and some ways really backfire and make things so hard. Thus, the name that I've given them, the backfiring tactics. I did an earlier episode on these. We might call that Backfiring Tactics 1.0. And I've talked about them often since on the podcast, because they're so totally the opposite of how to relate to your partner in a way that will call your partner and the relationship into the loving, collaborative one you want. And so I want to do another full episode on them today so you can understand what they look like and how to identify them in your own behavior so you can stop doing them, so you can make your marriage so much better fast. I've also added a couple things to this backfiring tactics list. So I want to make sure you know these additional ones in order to spot them in yourself and stop them in your marriage. Now, again, your work is to focus on stopping yourself from doing them, not on trying to stop your partner. Your work is to stay on your side of the street, not his side of the street. Now, again, I'm going to already reiterate this before you go feeling bad about looking at these in yourself and admitting that you may fall prey to using them. Please know, I personally feel no shame in admitting I did all of these backfiring tactics, a fair amount, in my first marriage. And I'm not perfect at not doing these now. In fact, I invite you to feel proud of yourself for being willing to look at the places you aren't so super skillful so you can become more skillful. This is a rare and beautiful, powerful thing to do, to be willing to look deeply at yourself and see ways in which you're showing up that aren't working, that aren't serving you or the relationship. And it can be fun too, because it's how you make your relationship and really your whole life better and better, right? So be willing to look deeply at this in yourself and be proud of yourself for that willingness, and not ashamed that you're doing these things that most humans do. And I also want you to know that you don't have to never do any of the backfiring tactics to have a great marriage. We just need to do them less and be aware of when we do and make repairs, like I talked about in the last episode, and keep working and leaning into the ways that actually work, that actually succeed at bringing out the strongest connection and support and love and collaboration in your partnership. Yeah? All right, so I'm going to share now 7 of the backfiring tactics. Feel free to take notes. So I'm going to go through the list really quick, and then I'm going to go into more depth on each one. So the first one is blaming, both blaming your partner and, of course, blaming yourself instead of taking ownership of your part in things and ownership of your feelings. Number 2, unconstrained self-expression, or what we might also call saying everything you think in the moment, especially a moment of reactivity. Number 3, defending. Number 4, control. Now, this can show up in so many ways, and I actually think control is, like I said a minute ago, at the heart of all of them. Like we could say it's the king of all the backfiring tactics because we tend to use all the other ones to control, or like I said earlier, caretake our own feelings. But I'll talk more directly about what control is and looks like in a few minutes. The 5th one is grandiosity, or needing to be right, or needing to make the other person wrong. The 6th is retaliation. And the 7th is withdrawal. And in this case, I mean withdrawing your whole self or aspects of yourself from your partner. Now, there are many episodes that I've already made on this podcast that dive into most of these more specifically, and I'm going to be making more as we move forward. But let's start with a quick summary of what each of these 7 backfiring tactics look like. Now, before I do, I want to make sure you don't take this as a super black and white thing. Not everything is going to fit neatly into these categories, meaning like lots of them overlap and straddle multiple of these categories. And they can all range from like the way that they show up in your relationship or the way you act these out can be sort of subtle, a sort of a subtle expression of them to an intense expression of them. So just know that. And putting them in these categories like I have really can be helpful for us to start recognizing patterns and habits of ours so that we can begin breaking them and moving into a place of more true relationship empowerment and way better levels of connection and love and collaboration. So here are some descriptions of how each of these may present so you can have a sense of what to look out for in yourself. The first one is blaming. This is been called the number 1 relationship killer. So it's a serious one to be aware of if it's going on for you. So blaming really means making it someone else's fault, in this case, our partner's fault, that something bad has happened, that you feel bad. In other words, it's about faulting your partner for a wrongdoing. So blaming can be saying it out loud, or you can just be thinking that how you're feeling and things that have gone wrong between you or in your life are his fault. Now, of course, sometimes your partner may have actually done something that wasn't so cool. So it's not like we should never point out how that thing affects us, that thing that they've done affects us. Of course, there are beautiful and important ways to do that. But when we make it their fault that we feel how we feel, that is blaming. Blame is saying any version of, it's your fault, you shouldn't have, you messed up, you are the reason we fight, you're the reason I feel like this, you're the reason everything's hard, right? Or like one of the ways I see it showing up is sort of this thought of like, if only you just tell me you XYZ, you love me more, then things would be good around here. Or if only you'd XYZ, then I'd be happy, right? And so an example of blame might sound like this. You never listen, so no wonder our relationship is so hard. Now, remember how I mentioned that all of these backfiring tactics are a sort of unconscious, actually very unevolved way of trying to tend to our own emotions. And one of the way blame is this or does this for us, like one of the ways it may quote unquote sort of try to serve us is that it can give us this sort of powerful feeling. So I was researching blame a little bit to prepare for this episode, and I found this description of blame. The act of blaming affords the blamer a sense of mastery and control, even feelings of omnipotence over their surroundings. Exhilaration infuses blamers as they accuse another and claim the entitlement to justice or payback for the supposed wrongdoing. So that's the powerful feeling. And supposedly it even creates a super surge of dopamine when we blame. So we get addicted to blame. And that blame makes us feel good for a very short moment. And then it makes us feel terrible because not only do we maybe feel guilty, but we also have a bad relationship. So I made a whole episode on this. This is that first Backfiring Tactics episode. So if you want to learn more about blame and you want to learn about how to stop as well, go over to episode 28. It's called 2 of the Biggest Backfiring Tactics in Love for HSPs and the Remedy. All right, let's move on to the second backfiring tactic, unconstrained self-expression. So this really means saying everything you think, including your lizard brain thoughts, which we could also call spewing. This also includes venting at your partner and criticizing and just dumping whatever you're thinking onto your partner with little or no filtering, no tact, care, or consideration. So this can really happen regularly for some of us. I'm actually this has been a little bit of a tendency of mine to never hold my tongue. I've grown very far in this, but it definitely was a strong backfiring tactic that I fell into when I was younger. So we can kind of fall into that always unconstrained camp, or if you tend to stuff and hold your feelings and thoughts in without ever addressing them or communicating effectively, which might happen for some of you because I think that can be a common thing to do as highly sensitive people. It can kind of be like a dam backing up until it bursts, right? And then you just say everything, right? With no constraint, with no tact, with no care. And you can really feel this when it happens. Like any of this, any unconstrained self-expression. Because you can sense yourself saying things you wouldn't say to just anyone at any time. You kind of feel out of control, like a rushing waterfall. And some part of you knows it's not okay to be like this. And if I didn't make it clear enough already, unconstrained self-expression tends to be, what I mean by that is the sort of more negative stuff, like judging and criticizing and, all the other things I said before. If you're unconstrainedly sharing your joy and love, that's not a problem most of the time, unless your partner is obviously not in a good space to listen. Then I would fall into this camp as well. Now, I haven't done an episode specifically on saying everything you think in unconstrained self-expression, so I'm going to put that one on the list, on the queue for me to create it. But there is an episode on complaint, and complaint falls into this category. And that episode is 29. So go listen to that one to find out about complaining and what to do instead. All right, the third backfiring tactic is defending. This one's probably the most this one's really obvious, right? And possibly the most common. And defending often just derails and distracts from the actual issue. If you're defending, you might refer to the past to kind of explain something away instead of trying to solve an issue for the future. So it's very ineffective. Or you might find that you're justifying, and again, trying to explain away something that your partner may be confronting you with or requesting of you. It might look like explaining why you weren't actually wrong in the situation, such as, well, you never told me to do that, right? That's a very defensive stance. Well, you never told me to, right? Defensiveness is ultimately really a way to hand the blame back to your partner. Well, like, I did nothing wrong, it must be you, kind of thing. Like, you might not actually say that, but in a sense, that's what's going on when we're defending. And as we already know, blaming won't get you anything good. So I want to reiterate that it is understandable why we defend, but it tends to escalate conflict and division and does not tend to get your partner backing down about whatever the issue is, or apologizing, or saying, oh, now I understand where you're coming from, right? Have you ever noticed when you're defensive, your partner doesn't act like that? He tends to act the opposite. So if it did get you like all these apologies and him understanding you completely, I would totally tell you to keep being defensive, but it really never helps your relationship. I'm going to add an episode on this to my episode creation queue as well. But I do have one on how to handle things when your partner is defensive, which is episode 126, when your spouse is defensive. So you'll in that one, you'll learn about how to handle it when your spouse is defensive. But right now, we're really wanting to focus on being aware of when you start getting defensive and choosing to drop it and try a different approach. All right, the fourth backfiring tactic, this king of the backfiring tactics, control. Control is about trying to get your partner to be a certain way or do a certain thing or stop doing certain things. And it can show up in small or large ways, such as micromanaging, trying to fix your partner, but also criticizing, shaming, demanding, scolding, complaining, right? These all can be part of control. I did a 3-part series of episodes on this, so listen to those for deeper understanding. That's episodes 60, 61, and 62. But here are some signs you may be veering into control territory. And I do want to add, a lot of highly sensitive people veer into this territory. And I'm pretty sure I talk about why in those other episodes. So go have a listen. Those are pretty great episodes. All right, some signs. Tone policing. You might find yourself trying to manage the quality of your partner's tone or how well he listens, like where he looks when you talk to him, how he communicates that he's hearing you, or telling him how to talk to you, what not to say, what to say. For example, you might say something like, you need to stop using an annoyed tone, or even, I need you to stop using an annoyed tone. It can look like trying to get him to talk about his feelings openly, trying to get him to have deep talks, depending how you go about doing it. It can look like telling him what you need him to do, or telling him you'd be happy only if he does X, Y, Z, or if you love me, you'll, hug me more, right? That's actually a form of manipulation. It can also look like crying or complaining, blaming, criticizing, giving the cold shoulder, demanding, having some sort of reactive emotional fit, right? Again, like crying or yelling, accusing, to sort of in an attempt to get him to understand how terrible something he's done makes you feel. That's different, I want you to notice, than actually just feeling awful. It's like when we do that and there's this part of us that's like, if I know that like I'm doing this to try to get him to see something, right? I have done that, so I know. I've shared before how I used to go to my bedroom and cry really hard, and I could feel in part that it was a tactic to get my ex-husband, to feel bad and rush to my side to soothe me and tell me he'll change and never do that thing again in the future, right? All right. It can also look, surprisingly, it can look like trying to not upset your partner or trying to fix his feelings and people please him, which is an attempt to make him feel good about you. And it can look like more tangible things, like some of us do more of these types of things, like redoing the way the dirty dishes are arranged in the dishwasher, or taking over a project he started because you don't think he's doing it well enough. or telling him what to wear, or how he should groom, or telling him when to be home, or how he talks to the kids, or what he does with the kids, what he should get to in terms of chores on the weekends, or how he spends his money, or what he eats. That's a big one I've heard about and have done myself. All sorts of things. These are micromanaging, but they're also forms of control. And they're really everything I've shared are attempts to manipulate him to behave in the ways that we think will make us personally feel better. But if you do these things, you're going to tend to feel kind of like a mom to him instead of a lover. You're going to feel burdened. You're going to feel resentful. And he's likely going to feel duty-bound, scolded, like a not up to par partner, ill-equipped, like he can't do anything right, like a kid failing school or something. So to learn more about this, I explain everything I've said here about control in much more depth over on those episodes 60, 61, and 62. So those are kind of essential listening. So if you haven't listened to those, absolutely go do that. And the fifth backfiring tactic is grandiosity. I am going to talk about this one soon in an upcoming episode, but for now, I invite you to check out an earlier episode called Being Right versus Being Married, which is episode 39. That's a great one to get a little bit of an understanding if it's going on for you or in your relationship. And grandiosity is really like a very clear, obvious power over dynamic, just like control is. And it often looks like you're feeling a lack of respect for and trust in your partner's capabilities, his ways, his approaches, his opinion. You think he doesn't do those things as well as you. You don't think of him as a full equal, or you see yourself as above him or kind of better than him in various ways. You might think, oh, I'd never do that, or I'd never act like that, or I'd never think that. And whether you make it known that you feel that condescension or that grandiosity, you definitely don't feel like he's an equal, right? And that tends to come across. And it often comes across in sort of subtle, sneaky ways as like through the other backfiring tactics, such as criticism, blame, control, etc. One of the ways I've seen this presented with highly sensitive women is that they feel like they're more evolved emotionally, and they really look down on their partner for not being as evolved emotionally. And the funny thing is, it's not actually always the case, we find, as we dig deeper, that they might have some skills around emotional intelligence and navigation that are different than their partners, but their partner has ones that are also skillful. So I'll share more about that in the grandiosity episode, which I will create sometime soon. All right, the sixth backfiring tactic is retaliation. Now, I don't see this one quite as much, maybe because sensitive women tend to be quite conscientious, but it's reacting to your spouse's backfiring use tactic or something going on from their end with the same or increased, quote, violence, unquote, in an attempt to get back at them or show them or punish them. And when I say show them, I mean, I'll show you kind of thing. So in other words, it's meeting your partner's unskillful behavior with giving him the cold shoulder, which could include stomping around and slamming doors and such, right, in an effort to punish, or saying things to punish, such as if your partner said, "You don't give me much slack," and you retaliate back with, "Well, you never show up," right? Or it can be even bigger, like way back when I was in my early 20s, an ex of mine slept with someone he never would have after I broke up with him, just simply to get back at me, right? That's an act of retaliation. He wanted me to suffer. I didn't actually, but that's kind of what's the attitude we have, whether on a smaller scale or a large scale, when we are falling prey to this backfiring tactic of retaliation. Obviously, retaliation just creates a war out of your love, and it will completely overtake your love if you keep letting yourself fall into retaliation. All right. The seventh and final backfiring tactic for now is withdrawal. I've never shared this before as a backfiring tactic, but I believe it's a common one for highly sensitive people, so I decided to include it. Now, although withdrawal can be giving the cold shoulder as a way to punish, which would really keep it in the category of retaliation, what I'm really meaning when I say withdrawal is removing parts of you, retreating or avoiding, like not sharing your feelings or your physical self, or never having certain types of discussions because you don't trust your partner or yourself to handle it when you share them, or it leads to difficult conversations. Now, this can oftentimes come from a sense of futility, like, oh, well, it won't matter anyway if I share this, so why bother? Or maybe simply being tired and not wanting to put in the effort or any effort. Or it could come from the idea that you'll protect your heart and his by not bringing up important issues because you don't want to upset anyone. So not being vulnerable, not telling the truth about what's going on for you. But when you withdraw big parts of yourself like this, when you don't share important truths or important feelings, when you don't share of your body in an intimate relationship, your relationship ends up missing some of the most important parts of you. And your love can't be full love of who you are because you're not showing who you are fully. That makes sense? Now, I want to add that this can oftentimes simply come from a place of personal disempowerment or not knowing how to soothe your nervous system when it goes into flee or freeze. And actually, that can be true for all of these backfiring tactics is when our nervous system is overactivated, if we're dysregulated, if we're in fight, flight, or freeze, or chronic stress, all of these backfiring tactics are so much more likely to happen. I like how I said that, so much more. Which is one of the reasons why I so emphasize learning how to guide and soothe and caretake your nervous system. And I always work with you on that when you work with me at the beginning. All right, so that's all the backfiring tactics I want to share today. Again, let me remind you that no one does these out of a bad, evil place inside themselves. We fall into these backfiring tactics in an unconscious, roundabout route to control our own feelings, our own emotions. What we're always trying to get is a feeling when it comes down to it. But usually we get a lot of bad feelings instead. And please don't misunderstand that not doing these means that backing off is the answer either. I mean, doing nothing is also not going to make your relationship the one you want it to be. So I'm not saying do nothing. I'm saying stop the backfiring tactics and learn the approaches that actually work to get you that relationship you want. I do want to mention that there are other approaches or things we do that we could also put under the category of backfiring tactics. I haven't put them there officially, but some of them might look like doing nothing, being especially needy and not giving your partner space, not asking for what you want, people pleasing your partner, caring for your partner at your own expense. I've called that overcare. There's a whole episode on that. Those are all other things, along with probably a ton more things that we humans can kind of unconsciously fall into, behaviors that we can fall into that really make the relationship worse rather than better. So what I've shared today is not a complete list, but these are, of course, some of the super biggest backfiring tactics and the ones I really want you to be looking out for. So for today, be honest with yourself and ask yourself which of the power over approaches, these backfiring tactics that I just listed in depth, do you tend to fall prey to? Because you are human, and these are very instinctive for us as humans, it's almost guaranteed that you do fall into regularly at least one of these backfiring tactics or more. So I invite you to please take a few moments to identify the ones you are prone to. This way you can have a lot more awareness, right? Awareness, which will allow you to begin the process of stopping these backfiring tactics from eroding the love and quality of connection in your marriage. And if you've heard me go through all of these backfiring tactics and haven't fully admitted you're doing any of them, here's one further way you can check in with yourself to see if you are in fact doing them. Simply notice if you ever feel this. When doing any of these backfiring tactics, what you're probably going to feel in some part of you is a little surge of power or kind of indignance or, again, kind of grandiosity. But you're also going to probably have a feeling of, this isn't quite right. This isn't how I want to be. A sense of something being out of alignment inside you, a sense of constriction in your body or a heaviness that comes with knowing you're not being the woman you want to be. A sense of acting out of integrity, and that you might also experience that as guilt or shame. So if any of that resonates with you, you're most likely using one or more of these backfiring tactics. So get curious and figure out which ones it is. And know that doing so is a very empowering move, both for you personally and for your relationship. Now, I want to reiterate, I would never expect you to 100% eradicate these types of behavior from your marriage, but scaling back on them and scaling up on what I call power with approaches is going to make you and your partner and everyone in your family a lot happier. I also want to invite you to understand that learning how to stop these things, stop doing these backfiring tactics, is not about not advocating for your desires or simply doing nothing, like I said before, or just tolerating things. No longer doing these backfiring tactics is actually part of stepping into a place of power with, a place of individual and relational empowerment. Power with, as I talked about on that episode 155 about the new emerging paradigm of marriage, power with really comes alive when you drop these old ways, these old backfiring tactics that aren't working for either of you, and you cultivate a large dose of acceptance, compassion, and working towards understanding, and some other very specific emotional and relational skills, including knowing how to support your nervous system into regulation when it goes into reactive threat states, and knowing how to guide your own emotions. All of this will give you powerful leverage to get you both on the same team and bring out the best of you so you can create a beautiful, resilient, loving, secure relationship together, full of connection and the deep love that you're wanting. So you're going to actually be way more successful at advocating for and getting more of the love and treatment you want when you shift from the power over approaches that come along with the backfiring tactics and into the power with approaches that I teach. So you'll find some of those power with approaches throughout the podcast, of course. And when I work with people in my treasured one-to-one program, which is what I'm currently offering, that's a 4-month one-to-one option. It's new. There are still spaces, so absolutely reach out if you're interested. But when I do this work, when I work with people in this program, we do the 8-week Better Marriage Jumpstart. This is one of the essential pieces of this, where you get supported to completely stop the backfiring tactics, which also means learning other ways to get the things you want and need in your relationship and in your emotional life. Right, getting those met, other ways to reach those things that you want, right? So you don't fall back into relying on these power over dynamics that only keep you from the kind of relationship you really want. Instead, when you work with me and you do this 8-week jumpstart along with the rest of the program, you step into power with and watch and enjoy as upward healing relational patterns move into your marriage, infusing it with love and ease and connection and so much more fulfillment. So if you'd like to join me in this 4-month private, just you and me time together of coaching and doing all of this, then head over to the link in the show notes or you can go to www.lifeisworthloving.com and click the Work With Me Privately tab. All right, my friends, spend some time noticing which backfiring tactics you tend to use, and then go through the rest of your week just observing where and when you might be using them. Just stepping into this place of witnessing is going to give you more power to choose to not engage these backfiring tactics and make a new, different, and better choice. All right, have a wonderful week and be oh so well.